Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reacting some Lindsay Nikole. I think this video is about her history of life. I think that's what she said in her last video. She's going to be starting a series on this. Yeah, but let's see what she's talking about today.
The Cambrian period.
The Cambrian period.
This video is sponsored by Rocket Money. If you were to travel back in time to 500 million years ago, the world would look completely alien to what you know now. Grass and trees didn't exist yet, even animals on land. And the ones in the water took shapes that seem so vastly different from the ones alive today. This bizarro world is known to us as the Cambrian period, which lasted from 542 to 488 million years ago. The start of the Cambrian was marked with an explosion of animal diversity that still perplexes scientists today. During this explosion, most of the major groups of animals appeared for the very first time, at least in the fossil record. This period was Mother Nature's trial run for size, shape, ecosystem structure, and behavior. The world had plenty of empty roles to fill and even invent, so things got weird.
So
I'm going to introduce you to some of
period.
these stranger species, explain why the Cambrian explosion happened, and even show you ancestors of some animals alive today. My name is Lindsay Nikole, and this is the history of life on Earth that we know of. We're going to start off by getting the general global conditions out of the way. Of course, this was a period of 54 million years, so there were plenty of fluctuations, to say the least. But really just some broad average general stuff so we all have context of what the fuck was going on during this time. Starting off with what the world looked like. Most of the northern hemisphere was submerged underwater, with the majority of land masses located somewhere under the equator. Aside from some... I feel like a weather reporter. Aside from some of the scattered land masses that you see, there was also a supercontinent, Gondwana, which consisted of parts of modern-day Africa, Australia, Antarctica, India, and South America. Okay, wait, let me slow down because you might be thinking, what about Pangaea? Pangaea was the prehistoric supercontinent we learned about in school. What's going on? This was way before Pangaea, like hundreds of millions of years before Pangaea. We'll get to that in like a couple of months. So Gondwana saw some pretty significant shit before Pangaea even thought about existing. Aside from that, the climate was generally warmer, and there was a decent amount of oxygen in the atmosphere compared to before, and the oceans were rich in nutrients, with some newer evidence suggesting there were likely bursts and dips of oxygen cycling happening in the seas in the earlier parts of the Cambrian, which likely played a role in the Cambrian explosion. So what exactly happened during this explosion? As I had mentioned in the introduction video for this series, there were animals alive before the Cambrian that had pretty cryptic identities in the fossil record. They were smaller, soft-bodied, and kind of restricted in their diversity. And then suddenly from a geologic time point of view, like a couple million years, animals were showing up in the fossil record that were bigger, explored new habitats, had hard parts like exoskeletons and shells, and came in a huge variety of new shapes or builds, i.e. morphology.
So were they all like
this
shellfish?
Explosion happened over a period of like 40 million
That's what they
years,
look
with
like.
the meat of it happening in 13 million years at the beginning of the Cambrian. And the reason why it happened isn't clear cut, more like layers and layers of shit that all snowballed into a explosion and resulted in this. I mentioned bursts and dips of oxygen in the ocean, and that was likely a very small fraction of it, like an almond mom sized slice of pie. You know, animals were also starting to evolve more complex structures like organs and organ systems, repeating body parts, i.e. segmentation, opening up the opportunity for new roles in their ecosystems, which put pressure on other species to keep up. Structures became more complex, so relationships between species became more complex for the very first time. For example, some animals started exploring life in the ocean ground, which was a big deal. This happened before the Cambrian explosion, but based on trace fossils, the time they spent in the ground became more significant, with evidence of more complex burrows that branched and went super deep and whatnot. That led to species evolving predatory relationships with those animals that were in the ground, and so on. One of the bigger developments during this explosion was the development of hard parts, like shells and skeletons, the process called biomineralization, an animal or organism producing minerals. This led to new body plans held in place by skeletons, providing structure, or animals producing shells for protection. That's a big deal. Like brachiopods, dude, blew up everywhere during the Cambrian. They were all over the place. They had this new sweet armor. This might have been a response to changing calcium concentrations in the ocean, because shells and skeletons used and still use calcium as like the base. They use it as the base. But there was also likely increased predation pressure with the new ecosystem roles and whatnot. So biomineralization was also a defensive response in a lot of cases. This was all happening for the first time, which is crazy to think about. You know, this is some serious primitive stuff, you guys. This is serious primitive stuff. So what were some of these major groups that seem to have appeared during the Cambrian explosion? Arthropods, mollusks, annelids, I wrote mollusks twice, echinoderms and chordates, which is the group that we belong to with other vertebrates, and also sea squirts. Real quick sidebar.
Sea squirrels.
I'm sure you're wondering what the fuck we have in common with the sea squirt. So chordates have this
squirt.
really
I thought you said squirrel.
That they have
I
for their
don't
whole life,
know what
or
that
just
is.
part of their life, like maybe in the embryonic stage or a baby stage. That is a notochord, dorsal hollow nerve cord, pharyngeal gill slits, and a postanal tail. If you've ever taken a zoology class, I know that shit is burned in your brain. A sea squirt, as a little larva, looks like this, and then turns into this. So they've got all that at the beginning. For the sake of this video, the only thing you need to remember from that list is a notochord, because it's gonna come up a couple times. Chordates have notochords, a cartilaginous skeletal rock. Good. That's it. So let me introduce you to a couple of these early chordates, starting with Hycuichthys. Looks exactly like you'd expect it to look. Simple body plan, nothing crazy. It was discovered in the 90s at the Xinjiang fossil site in China, which has unearthed some of the most well-preserved fossils from the Cambrian, with even soft tissues preserved from time to time. Pretty sick. Hycuichthys, let's shorten it to haiku so I don't have to keep saying that, was alive about 518 million years ago. There have been over 500 fossil specimens found of them, which led scientists to determine that they were about an inch long.
Huh? I'm about to say, she said an inch. I was like, God.
A notochord, boom, and a sail-like dorsal fin running down all the way to the end of their body. They also had eyes and possible nasal sacs in between them, which was a big deal this early on in vertebrate evolution. And they were likely active, but not excellent swimmers. Also good to note that jaws hadn't evolved yet. I know that is impossible to comprehend, but their mouth was just a little circle. None of this.
So they wasn't doing
it. And there were plenty of other fish like haiku that had pretty much the same set of traits, just slightly different, like Milocunmingia. Even this early in the existence of chordates, there was diversity in their kind. Let me give you a haiku about haiku. A small, delicate fossil of a vertebrate fish from the deep past. Thank you. Okay, let me show you another chordate that was a little bit weirder. Pikaia, named after the pika, the relative to rabbits that lives near the fossil site they were found.
So
Burgess Shale in Canada, one of the most well-known fossil sites in the world because of how many Cambrian species have been discovered there. It was described in 1911 by paleontologist Charles Doolittle Walcott. Sick name. He's gonna come up a lot. He practically described everything in this video. Like, his name was just everywhere. Matter of fact, let's make it a drinking game. Go grab a glass of water or a margarita. Pikaia was alive even earlier than haiku, about 530 million years ago, so pretty close to the start of the Cambrian. Today, they are thought to be the most primitive vertebrate that we know of, ancestral to us, frogs, fish, rabbits, rats, birds, sharks, so many things.
Her and Kato did her graphics with these rats and rabbits, bro. Do not be on. I do not like them Jones.
Like the bristle worms that we talked about in the worm video. They seemed to have a segmentation like that of a worm. And then years later, in 1979, those segments were actually thought to be muscle blocks attached to an apparent notochord. But the technology to confirm this hadn't existed yet. So the question became fish or worm. Scientists on the worm side of the debate thought that the fish classification was unqualified and forceful, mumbo jumbo, Hollywood propaganda. But a 2012 analysis of Pikaia using electron microscopy said, "Eat it, bitch." They found a smoking gun. Scientists found myomeres all over Pikaia's body, which are bundles of fibers that only chordates have. Boom. Chordate. Also, I want to add that the myomeres were found by a team led by scientist Simon Conway Morris, whose name is going to come up a lot in this video too. So, add it to the drinking game. Pikaia was obviously a very unorthodox primitive fish. They had a pair of tentacle-like antennae on the top of their head, which made them look like a little bug. I think it's cute. They also had a circular mouth to eat small particles. Remember, no jaws yet. There's also been evidence of mud found in the stomachs of some of the fossils, so maybe they were deposit feeders, eating stuff out of the sediment and accidentally eating the sediment. Before we jump into the next group, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Rocket Money. If you've been following me on this channel, you know a big goal of mine is to do more in-the-field content, travel to different places to make videos. That obviously requires the video description. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video. Now, on to the strange specimens. Another major group to take note of were the trilobites. Often considered the dominant group.
The Joan and Arcs I be beating with a hatchet.
Beasts terrorizing the seas. But they were actually just little guys all over the place. Literally everywhere for a very long time. Not dominance in size, but dominance in abundance, like ants or beetles. So what were the trilobites? The trilobites were a group of arthropods that at first glance don't look like anything special. Like, yeah, that's an arthropod. What distinguishes them from other similar looking arthropods like modern isopods is the shape of their dorsal exoskeleton, their back. It's separated into tree sections. Trilobite, a thick middle and two flat sides. used. This simple yet defining body form worked really well for them. They were fully developed in the Cambrian, which means they likely came before the explosion, all the way until the end of the Permian period, about 250 million years ago. So 300 million years of this. So get used to them, because they're not going anywhere for the next few episodes. And they stayed looking like this. No major developments, which is surprising that such an early body form survived for that long without any major evolutionary changes. Like, that is S tier. They also fossilize really well. I'm gonna put up a number on the board. 25,000. I want you to guess what this number means.
How many fossils?
Take a second to guess. How many trilobite fossils have been found? Good guess, but no. That's how many trilobite species have been described. Species. 25,000 separate species scientists have been able to describe and distinguish from the other 24,999 of animals that lived hundreds of millions of years ago.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
So they were just dominating.
Only scratching the surface of their actual existence due to the fragile nature of the fossil record. You could buy a trilobite fossil on the internet right now if you wanted to. Look it up. That's how many fossils there are of them. Scientists don't even need them. They're like common rocks at this point. They ranged in size from less than an inch long to about 28 inches long. They inhabited every marine ecosystem at the time, from before and long after the Cambrian, interacting with a variety of animals that would be unrecognizable to our eyes today. So let's get into the stranger side of the Cambrian, starting off with a heavy hitter, Anomalocaris, whose name translates to abnormal shrimp, which, yeah, hit the nail right on the head. If someone showed this to me and said, this is a shrimp, I would say that is an abnormal shrimp. Anomalocaris is considered one of the Earth's first apex predators. That we know of. They could get to about 1.5 feet long, which doesn't sound very big, but compared to other animals alive at the time, this was massive. Remember, this was like the grand opening of animal history and evolution and diversity, so they were all still little guys. Due to the nature of their soft bodies, most of the trunks from the elephants. Their frontal appendages and parts of their mouth, because those pieces are hardened. And that was definitely true for some of the earlier fossils found. The first fossil was just of the frontal appendages. Scientists thought they belonged to some sort of shrimp, hence the name abnormal shrimp. And then a fossil was found of the mouth, but that was thought to be the remains of an ancient jellyfish. Then a fossil with a body and a mouth was found, and it was thought to be a sea sponge, then later reanalyzed to be a jellyfish on top of a sea sponge. Finally, in the 80s, a fossil with the two frontal appendages and the head and the mouth were found all together. It made scientists realize they had their shit all mixed up. And since then, more fossils have been found with this arrangement. Not a sponge, not a shrimp, not a jellyfish. Instead, an early arthropod, specifically part of an extinct group called the radiodonts, which took some unusual forms. Anomalocaris' frontal appendages were used likely in a variety of ways, depending on the species. Grabbing prey, maneuvering it to the mouth, sediment sifting, filter feeding on plankton, etc. And they likely moved through the water all suave, with overlapping lobes that, combined with their tail fan for stability, made super smooth undulations. They were originally thought to have eaten trilobites, but a new study from this year that used lots of science shit determined that their mouths wouldn't have been strong enough for that, because the trilobites had really hard exoskeletons, but that they were likely fast swimmers, so they suggested higher up in the water column instead of the sea floor where trilobites roamed. Another animal that is often mentioned in any conversation about the Cambrian is Opabinia. Absolutely
never heard of
little
it.
Fella. I don't even know where to begin. Everything about their face made them unusual and outcasts in the family tree for over 100 years.
That don't look weird. Like he got mushrooms coming out his head.
5 mushroom-shaped eyes. Yeah. Previously not seen on any other animal. They also had a clawed proboscis that looked like an elephant trunk and was likely used as such, or similarly, digging out worms from burrows, grabbing onto and passing it to the mouth that was on the underside of their body and also facing backwards. So they were determined to be early arthropods, which is probably not a surprise. Just like but the question was,
making life difficult,
are their brethren? Nobody else looked like this until just last year in 2022, when a new Opabiniid fossil was found in Utah named Utaroa. They had the same 5-eye configuration and a little elephant trunk, but they just had more of a hairy appearance on their dorsal surface. Finally, Opabinia is not alone.
Yeah, they don't be lying when they say sea creatures will be the aliens, bro.
Opabinia was found.
Junk look weird.
Little Walcott. So
Drake should be coming from outer space.
So that counts for 2. Hallucigenia, which I did in its own video earlier in the year because it is one of the most bizarre animals ever found. Scientists didn't even know which way was up, but I'll still give you a little summary. Hallucigenia, as you can see, looks like some
he got spikes on his back.
Urchin worm. So when they were first discovered in the Burgess Shale by Charles Doolittle Walcott, scientists didn't know what they were looking at.
So boy, just everywhere found us
that had what looked like 7 pairs of spikes coming out of one end and 7 pairs of squigglies coming out of the other. They initially thought they were looking at an early annelid worm, specifically related to bristleworms. Once again, what was what though nobody knew. So then in 1977, Simon Conway Morris decided to take a closer look. He guessed that the spiky half was the bottom, that hallucigenia walked on stilts, and that the squiggly half was the top, and they were tentacles with mouths at the ends of each of them.
But that wouldn't make sense.
Because what the fuck? But you know what? Somehow that stuck for 14 years. Until new fossils from Xinjiang concluded they had it flipped. The mouth tentacles were actually legs with claws on the ends of each of them, and the stilts were spikes coming out of its back.
That's
and then
what I
years
would've
later in
thought.
2015, using electron microscopy, they determined which end was the head side and found little eye spots and a mouth with a ring of needle-like teeth inside of it. They also had 3 extra pairs of appendages close to their head, which were likely used as tentacles. So maybe they had tentacles after all. Hallucigenia is one of the many species featured in my spooky specimens coloring book.
Yeah, it just be like weird stuff, like that whole bill looks stupid.
All right, next. This one to me is giving like amphibious shrimp from a distant planet. Very bizarre. They were found at, you guessed it, the Burgess Shale, first described by, you guessed it, Charles Doolittle Walcott. He initially called them lace crabs, but then a couple years later described them as some sort of trilobite. Throughout the years, scientists had other ideas based on their set of characteristics. Maybe they were more closely related to the extended arachnid group that included horseshoe crabs and sea spiders. Or maybe they were some sort of crustacean, but nothing ever stuck, because this particular mix of traits was too bizarre. So for now, they sit in their own little grouping in the arthropod family tree. As you can see, they have this unusual head with 2 sets of spines that extend backwards towards the back, down the length of the body, as well as 2 paddle-like appendages for swimming, antenna to sense the environment, and they had up to 26 body segments, each with a pair of legs that branched downwards on each side, as well as gill structures that branched upwards. Fossil evidence suggests they might have been iridescent, like changing color depending on what angle you're looking at it. Like bubbles or a jewel beetle, which is pretty cool.
How did they determine it from a fossil?
Despite their otherworldly appearance, they have actually been found in tons at the Burgess Shale. Over 12,000 fossils of them have been found. Another slightly less common animal from the Burgess Shale looks like home sweet pineapple, Wovaxia, first described in 1899, with later more complete specimens found by the one and only Charles Doolittle Walcott.
Yo, he was just everywhere, bro.
Identified as some sort of
just pulling up anything.
Of course, this didn't stick because 1985 came around, and who decided to fuck shit up? Simon Conway Morris. He classified Wovaxia as some sort of mollusk of the shellless variety. He noticed some similarities to the mollusk mouth. And after a bit of back and forth between the 2 groups, annelid or mollusk, there seems to be a consensus that this was in fact an early mollusk, or maybe relative to mollusks, or maybe the ancestor to Guy Fieri. Wovaxia was covered in these overlapping plates called sclerites. They were also extremely small, just a centimeter tall, including the spikes. Just a little guy, yet also very badass. A couple of honorable mentions of other strange specimens from the Cambrian are Habelia, just looks like a little rug rat, classified as, you guessed it, an early arthropod. And also hyolithids. They look like that Italian guy with no eyes and the mustache that is just peak character design.
I know he did everything.
Went on and flourished in later periods, evolving into groups that we're more familiar with today. Others, it was the end of the road, because the end of this period is marked with an extinction that I kind of don't want to talk about, because extinctions are bummers. But luckily, I know just the right person to hand this off to. You know her and love her from the incredible channel Animal Logic, my friend Danielle. Take it away.
So I got a new channel to check out.
The Cambrian period has a special place in every Canadian paleontologist's heart because we have one of the richest Cambrian fossil localities in the world. There were so many amazing creatures in this period, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and many of those animals didn't make it out of the Cambrian. The Cambrian extinction event is still a bit of a mystery. It happened 485 million years ago and marked the end of several trilobite species. But we still don't know quite why it happened. One of the leading theories is that high levels of volcanic activity caused dramatic climate change.
Yeah, I heard that one. Yeah.
There is evidence of massive amounts of lava coming up to the surface of the Earth at that time, and the eruptions likely changed the makeup of the atmosphere.
Shockwave, crazy.
There are different types of carbon in the air. C12, which plants can absorb easily, makes up most of the carbon in the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions release a lot of a carbon isotope called C13, which plants don't really love. When there's too much C13, plants will rapidly die off, setting off a chain reaction that can lead to extinction events. On a broader scale, the Cambrian Ordovician extinction event can be seen as the culmination of a series of extinction events caused by a lack of oxygen in the ocean and an accumulation of toxic hydrogen sulfide. Volcanic eruptions and changes in the water and carbon cycles periodically made the ocean a giant dead zone throughout the Cambrian. This was a chaotic time for the ocean, which didn't become permanently oxygenated until about 100 million years later. After the Cambrian extinction, many of the groups of animals we have today arose. But I'll let you talk about those amazing new species. Back to you, Lindsay.
And you bitches are gonna have to wait and see what those animal groups were next video. Okay, fine. I'll give you a little preview. Coral reefs, many snails, and cephalopods. And also this guy. Obviously, they're not still around, but I wish they were because they're cool as fuck. But I'll tell you about them more in the next episode. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Check out my Patreon for previews of
I'm definitely gonna check that out though. Yeah, bro. I don't. Goodness, what was that joint called? Like had the tusk. What was it? No, not the tusk. Whatever it was, bro. Them Jones was looking weird though back then. Like they were just like all should be from outer space. Them Jones was looking creepy. I'm gonna be honest with you. And then the one with the like all these spikes on his back, and then these long, then these weird leg looking things with tentacles coming out his neck. Like that don't even make sense. Yeah, but I'm gonna be checking out the rest of this series. I might check out the other channel. I don't remember what the name was. I'm gonna go back in the video and check that out. Find it later. But yeah, if y'all like the video, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.